3 weeks ago, I was begging my parents, who I thought were struggling to make ends meet, to co-sign a lease so I wouldn't be homeless in San Francisco. They refused and gave me a lecture on responsibility. Today, I'm sitting in a lawyer's office, and he just informed me that my grandmother left me a $5 million trust. A fortune my parents knew about and hid from me my entire life. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever been lied to by your family about money or anything else, hit that subscribe button, because the truth I'm about to uncover is even more shocking than the $5 million. My name is Isabella, and I'm 28 years old. 3 weeks ago, I was staring at an eviction notice in my tiny San Francisco studio, my phone still warm from a call where my parents had lectured me on fiscal responsibility before refusing to co-sign a new lease. They told me it was time I learned to stand on my own 2 feet. Today I'm sitting in a plush leather chair in a 50th floor law office overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge. The lawyer, a kind, older gentleman named Mr. Davenport, has just slid a document across the polished table. It's a trust agreement, left to me by my beloved grandmother. For $5 million. An inheritance my parents, Harrison and Victoria, knew about my entire life. They watched me work 3 jobs to get through art school. They listened to me cry about rent and bills. They nearly let me become homeless. All while knowing this fortune was waiting for me. They didn't just withhold a secret, they actively participated in my struggle, using it as a tool to control me. My hands are shaking so badly I can't pick up the document. The number is meaningless. All I can see is their faces, smug with false sympathy as they lectured me about the value of $1. I'm curious, have you ever discovered a family secret that made you question everything you thought you knew? Just type yes or no in the comments below, and let me know where you're watching from. Because this secret wasn't just about money. It was about a lifetime of calculated deception, and I was about to unravel all of it. To understand the sheer, breathtaking cruelty of that lie, you have to understand the performance I grew up in. We lived in Marin County, a bubble of extreme wealth just across the Golden Gate Bridge from San Francisco. Our neighbors were tech billionaires and venture capitalists. But inside our pristine, multi-million-dollar home, my parents, Harrison and Victoria, staged a decades-long play I call The Struggling Middle Class. My mother was the director of this production. Appearances are everything, Isabella, she'd say, adjusting her pearl earrings before a neighborhood function. But at home, she'd sigh dramatically over the cost of organic milk at the grocery store. My entire childhood was a masterclass in this contradiction. I wore second-hand clothes from consignment shops, while my father quietly added another vintage sports car to his collection in a rented garage. I was told we couldn't afford the $50 fee for the school art club, while my mother maintained her weekly appointments at a spa in Sausalito. They were experts at making me feel guilty for every small desire, for wanting the same simple things my friends took for granted. You just don't appreciate the value of $1, my father would lecture. It's a powerful form of control, making a child feel like their needs are a burden. If you ever grew up feeling guilty for asking for things, or were made to feel like you were too expensive, just type the number 1 in the comments. I just want to see how many of us were taught that our needs were an inconvenience. It conditioned me to expect nothing, which made their great deception all the more effective. The only escape from that cold, confusing world of theirs was my grandmother Margaret's house. They told me she was a retired schoolteacher living on a modest pension, and her small, cluttered bungalow in Berkeley was a universe away from the sterile perfection of our Marin County home. Her house smelled of cinnamon, old books, and turpentine. It was a sanctuary. Every Saturday, while my parents were at the country club maintaining appearances, I was with her. We didn't talk about money, we talked about color and light. We didn't worry about status, we painted. Your parents worry about the price of things, she told me once, her hand guiding mine as I learned to mix watercolors. But you, my dear, you understand the value of things. She was the only person in my life who saw my art not as a frivolous hobby, but as a gift. She nurtured it fiercely and secretly. When my parents refused to pay for a summer art program for gifted students, an anonymous sponsorship magically covered my tuition. When my advanced art supplies were deemed too expensive, a $100 gift certificate to an art store would mysteriously arrive in the mail. I always suspected it was her, but she would just wink and say, "The universe provides for its artists, Isabella." I didn't understand then that she wasn't just my biggest fan. She was my secret patron, fighting a quiet war on my behalf against my parents' suffocating practicality. She was the only person who saw the real me, and told me that person was not just enough, but extraordinary. That belief became the bedrock I would unknowingly need to survive the earthquake to come. I managed to build a life for myself in San Francisco, working as a barista by day and a freelance graphic designer by night. It was a constant hustle, but I was independent, and I was making art. Then the notice came. My rent-controlled building was being sold. I had 60 days to find a new apartment in one of the most expensive cities in America. I found a tiny studio I could just barely afford, but with my freelance income, the landlord required a cosigner. With a knot in my stomach, I called my parents. I hated asking, but I was desperate. I thought, surely, this is a line they wouldn't cross. They wouldn't let me become homeless. I was wrong. My father's response was swift and cold. Absolutely not, Isabella. You are a grown woman. It is past time you learn to be financially responsible. We will not put our finances at risk for your artistic fantasy. My mother chimed in, her voice dripping with condescending pity. We warned you this would happen, dear. Perhaps this will be the lesson you need to finally pursue a more practical career. A lesson. They were willing to let their only daughter face eviction and homelessness, and they had the audacity to call it a lesson. I hung up the phone, staring at the eviction notice, feeling a soul-deep abandonment I had never known before. The lie wasn't just that they pretended to be poor, it was that they pretended to care. It's a special kind of pain when someone who is supposed to love you uses responsibility as a weapon to justify their own cruelty. If you've ever been lectured by someone who had the power to help but chose not to, just hit that like button. I felt utterly alone, completely unaware that my grandmother had already built me a lifeboat. I just hadn't found it yet. Just when I thought things couldn't possibly get any worse, with the eviction notice taped to my door, I got the call that shattered my world. It was my mother, her voice strangely detached. Grandma Margaret passed away in her sleep last night, she said. The funeral is on Saturday. I flew home on a credit card I knew I couldn't pay off, my grief a raw, gaping wound. The funeral was a surreal performance. My parents played the part of the grieving children perfectly, accepting condolences from their wealthy friends, their sorrow as impeccable as their designer black outfits. They were more concerned with the catering at the reception than the monumental loss of the woman who had been my entire world. Back at their house after the service, with my eviction date just a week away, I finally worked up the courage to ask the question that represented my last sliver of hope. Did she leave anything? A will? I wasn't expecting a fortune. I was praying for a few $1,000s, just enough to get a security deposit on a new apartment, one final act of her quiet support. My father, Harrison, looked at me with an expression of deep, rehearsed pity. Isabella, your grandmother lived on a teacher's pension. Her medical bills at the end, they wiped out everything she had. There's nothing left. My mother added the final, crushing blow. In fact, honey, we'll probably have to sell her little house just to cover all the debts. And just like that, my last lifeline was gone. I was grieving, broke, and days away from being homeless. My parents, having delivered their devastating lie, offered me a glass of Chardonnay and began discussing their upcoming trip to Europe. I spent the next few days in a fog of grief and panic, packing my life into cardboard boxes, trying to figure out which friend's couch I could crash on. I was down to my last $200. It was during this rock-bottom moment that my phone rang with an unknown number from a downtown San Francisco area code. The voice on the other end was deep and formal. He introduced himself as Julian Davenport, an attorney, and said he was the executor of my grandmother Margaret's estate. My first thought was that I was being sued for the medical debts my parents had invented. I walked into his high-rise office overlooking the bay, feeling small and out of place, fully expecting to be handed a bill. But Mr. Davenport didn't talk about debts. He opened a thick, leather-bound folder and looked at me with kind, serious eyes. Isabella, he began, what I'm about to tell you will likely come as a shock. Your grandmother was not just a retired schoolteacher. She was also one of the earliest angel investors in a Silicon Valley tech company that is now a global giant. My mind struggled to comprehend his words. He continued. She was a very wealthy woman, and she was fiercely determined to protect your future from the financial mismanagement she had witnessed. He slid a document across the table. She structured this trust for you to be legally ironclad. Your parents have no access to it. It is entirely and exclusively yours. I stared at him, speechless, my eyes scanning the page until they landed on the final figure. I read it once, twice, a third time, the number seeming to float off the page, unreal and impossible. It wasn't a few $1,000s. It wasn't even 100,000. The trust was for $5 million. I was still reeling, the number 5 million echoing in the silent room, when Mr. Davenport said, "There's one more thing, Isabella. Your grandmother wanted you to hear this from her directly." He turned a large monitor on his desk towards me and pressed play. And there she was, my grandmother Margaret, sitting in her favorite armchair, looking frail, but with that familiar, determined glint in her eyes. The video was filmed just months before she passed. "My dearest Isabella," she began, her voice filling the sterile office with a warmth that brought instant tears to my eyes. "If you are watching this, it means I'm gone, and you've finally learned the truth. I am so sorry, my love, for the secrets I had to keep." She took a shaky breath. "Your parents, they received their inheritance long ago. I watched them squander it on appearances, on a lifestyle they couldn't sustain, all while telling you that money was tight. I knew then that I had to protect you. I had to ensure that your future, your art, your beautiful spirit, would be safe from their patterns of mismanagement and control." Her image on the screen looked right at me. "They will try to tell you that you manipulated me, or that I was confused. Do not believe them. This was my clearest, most deliberate act of love. This money is not a prize, my darling. It is a tool. It is your freedom." The video ended, and I just sat there, sobbing, overwhelmed by the fierce, protective love that had been guarding me all along. It's a powerful thing, to be truly seen by someone. Who in your life sees the real you? Let me know in the comments. Let's fill this space with some positivity. In that moment, my grandmother didn't just give me an inheritance. She gave me back my own reality. Mr. Davenport, the lawyer, warned me they would react badly once he officially informed them of the will. The next day, my phone exploded with a barrage of angry, demanding voicemails. But I never imagined they would stoop this low. I was in the middle of a chaotic lunch rush at the coffee shop where I worked, my apron splattered with espresso, when the bell above the door chimed. My parents, Harrison and Victoria, walked in. They looked completely out of place in their tailored designer clothes, their presence sucking all the air out of the small, bustling cafe. They bypassed the line and came straight to the counter where I was working the register. "Isabella, we need to talk," my mother said, her voice just loud enough for the entire line of customers to hear. "We've been calling. Why are you ignoring your family?" My face burned with humiliation as everyone turned to stare. My father then placed his expensive leather briefcase on the counter and clicked it open. He pulled out a thick legal document. "Your grandmother was clearly not in her right mind," he said, his voice low and firm. "We've had our lawyer draw up a simple amendment to the trust. It adds us as co-trustees, just to help you manage things. Sign here." He was trying to force me to sign away my inheritance in the middle of my minimum wage job, using public shame as his weapon. The old Isabella would have signed it just to make the scene stop, but I could hear my grandmother's voice in my head. "This is your freedom." I looked my father dead in the eye. "No," I said, my voice quiet but unshakable. The look on his face wasn't just anger, it was the pure shock of a man whose authority had been defied for the very first time. My father's face turned a dark shade of red. My boss, sensing a major scene brewing, quickly ushered my parents outside. They waited on the busy San Francisco sidewalk, expecting me to follow and surrender. I took off my stained apron, handed it to my boss, and told him I had to quit. Then, I walked out to face them, the cool city air a stark contrast to the heated tension between us. "You have made a grave mistake," my father said, his voice a low growl. "You have one final choice, Isabella. You sign those papers now, and we can salvage what's left of this family. Or you walk away. But if you walk away, we will tell everyone, our friends, our family, the entire community, that you manipulated your grandmother on her deathbed. You will be an outcast." He thought the threat of being shamed and abandoned would be enough to break me. A year ago, it would have. But as he spoke, I wasn't hearing his words. I was hearing my grandmother's voice from the video, Will, as clear as day. This is your freedom. Build the life you deserve. She had known this exact moment would come. She had been preparing me for it. I looked at these two people who were willing to burn my reputation to the ground for money they hadn't earned, and I finally felt free of their power. I choose my grandmother's faith in me, I said, my voice clear and steady. I choose freedom. It's an impossible choice, isn't it? The family you were born with versus the person you were meant to become. If you were faced with that decision, to walk away from everything you know to save yourself, do you think you could do it? Let me know with a yes or no in the comments. My father's eyes went cold. Then you have no family, he said, before turning his back on me for good. I thought being disowned on a public sidewalk was the worst it could get. I was wrong. My parents, true to their threat, decided that if they couldn't have the money, they would systematically destroy my reputation. Their weapon of choice was a masterpiece of modern manipulation, a GoFundMe campaign. The page went viral in our old community. The title read, "Help Betrayed Parents After Daughter's Greed." It painted a heartbreaking, fictional story of two loving parents who had spent their modest life savings caring for an ailing mother, only to be financially abused by their cold, ungrateful daughter Me, who had swooped in to steal the entire inheritance. It was brilliant in its cruelty, and it was working. I received hateful messages from cousins and aunts, calling me a monster. They had taken our private pain and weaponized it for a public audience. For a few days, I hid, crushed under the weight of their lies. But then I remembered my grandmother's voice from the video. This is your freedom. And I realized that freedom also meant the freedom to fight back. I didn't engage with them online. Instead, I contacted a respected investigative blogger in the Bay Area known for exposing fraud. I sent her only one thing, a 60-second, undeniable clip from my grandmother's video, Will. That evening, the blogger published her story, embedding the video. There was my grandmother, clear as day, stating for the record, my children, Harrison and Victoria, received and spent their multi-million-dollar inheritance years ago. This trust is to protect my granddaughter, Isabella, from their financial irresponsibility. The truth bomb had been dropped, and the shockwave was about to hit them. The blogger's story, with my grandmother's video at its center, ripped through the tight-knit community of Marin County. The effect was instantaneous and, for my parents, devastating. The fraudulent GoFundMe page was shut down within hours, reported by hundreds of people. The story was picked up by larger Bay Area news outlets. The friends they had spent a lifetime cultivating suddenly stopped returning their calls. My mother was quietly asked to resign from her charity boards. My father's business partners demanded an emergency meeting to discuss the reputational damage to their firm. In the world of appearances they had so carefully constructed, they had committed social suicide. Their performance was finally over, and the audience was booing them off the stage. As their world of lies crumbled, mine began to build. The $5 million wasn't a ticket to a life of luxury. For me, it was a profound responsibility. It was my grandmother Margaret's legacy. I knew exactly what she would want me to do. I didn't buy a condo with a view or a luxury car. Instead, I found an old, beautiful warehouse in Oakland's Arts District and poured my energy into renovating it. I used a portion of the trust to establish Beatrice's Place, a non-profit gallery and studio space, providing subsidized rent and materials for gifted young artists who, like me, were struggling to make it in the Bay Area. It was a continuation of my grandmother's secret patronage, but this time, it was out in the open. Standing in that dusty, cavernous space, filled with the scent of sawdust and possibility, I felt a sense of peace I had never known. I wasn't just building a gallery. I was building a sanctuary, transforming the pain of my past into a foundation for others. It's been 2 years since I sat in that lawyer's office, my world tilting on its axis. My life today looks nothing like I ever could have imagined. Beatrice's Place is thriving. It's a loud, messy, beautiful space, filled with paint-splattered floors and the fierce, brilliant energy of young artists who are finally getting their shot. Last month, one of our first scholarship recipients, a talented sculptor from East Oakland, had her first sold-out gallery show. Watching her stand proudly beside her work, I felt my grandmother's presence so strongly it was like she was standing right next to me, smiling. This was her real legacy, not a number in a bank account, but the quiet, powerful act of lifting others up. My parents? I hear they moved to Florida. We don't speak. I've made peace with that. My chosen family, my friends, the artists I support, the community we've built fills my life with more authentic love than I ever knew in that big, empty house in Marin. I finally understand what my grandmother's true gift was. The real inheritance wasn't the money, that was just the tool. The real inheritance was the freedom to walk away from a toxic system. It was the courage to build a life based on my own values of creativity and compassion, not their values of status and greed. True wealth isn't what you possess, it's the integrity you live by, and the positive impact you leave on the world. If this story has inspired you to think about the legacy you want to build in your own life, please hit that subscribe button. Let's create a community that values character over cash. Thank you for listening.